إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
Sister Yvonne Ridley, and I think she really requires little introduction. Her name speaks for herself, so I'm going to welcome her to the stage. If I can ask Sister Yvonne Ridley to come to the stage and deliver a speech. Thank you very much. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Brothers, sisters, assalamu alaikum. It's always fantastic to come to Birmingham. And I was looking round upstairs, and I'm glad to see that the Maktabar bookstall is up and running and operating for the first time since that dreadful police raid when the owner, Abu Bakr, made that historic statement that we're living in a police state. I've never heard Tony Blair respond so quickly to a Muslim. I think it took 15 minutes for him to respond. I'm going to talk today on two issues, and the first one is really to address to the sisters, although it's good that the brothers are here as well, because there are times when we women are our own worst enemies, and I despair at the way the global sisterhood is often fractured and splintered by women who do more damage than any chauvinist. A classic example was brought to my attention a few days ago after a group of long-suffering neighbours smashed their way into a brothel and kidnapped the owner. Hooray, I heard most feminists cry, but for some reason the reaction changed when you mentioned that the activists wore veils and were from a nearby religious school. Suddenly, the cries of hooray died down, and there were talk about, especially in the media, about Taliban-style behavior coming from burqa-clad zealots in Pakistan. It was actually the first time such courageous direct action had been taken against the growing prostitution and sex trade in Pakistan, a trade, may I remind everyone, which is illegal in most parts of the so-called civilized world, as well as in Pakistan. The madrasa girls also demanded that local video shop owners close down their stores and start selling Disney instead of dirt. I have seen evidence of the sort of hardcore porn they were complaining about. We are talking about the sort of stuff you couldn't even buy under the counter in some of Europe's red light districts. So did the global sisterhood rally around the Pakistan brothel busters and congratulate them? Sadly not. And one local writer in particular berated their actions, but more about her later. Of course, the Jamia Hafsa Madrasa has a reputation of being a thorn in the side of the city administrators and Pakistan's President General Musharraf. Shortly after the raid, I saw some outrageous media reports about the so-called Talibanization of Pakistan and the behavior of the students of the madrasa, cited as a prime example. The porn and sex industry is loathed by all feminists, regardless of whether they have faith or no faith, because it feeds off the blatant exploitation of women. It is an industry set up purely for the gratification of men who hand over money to other men who usually control the women. In Pakistan's tribal areas and the northwest frontier province, religious groups have sought to introduce Islamic law to stamp out such practices. These groups are, by the way, democratically elected to the Pakistan government, so it's not as though they forced their way in. And they did make their views known quite clearly in their election manifestos. So if shops trading in sex and porn across the tribal areas and NWFP were forcibly closed down, it could hardly have come as a great surprise. Yet the media calls it Talibanization. I would call it an attempt to introduce some respect towards women. Western feminists have been trying to put a spanner in the works of the sex industry for decades, and certainly long before the arrival of Mullah Omar's long-bearded and turbaned Talibs. Funnily enough, when the arrival of a bikini-clad Miss Afghanistan was hailed as a major breakthrough for the liberation of Afghan women a couple of years ago, I think Western feminists were even more outraged than the Taliban. The concept of the top shelf in newsagents and supermarkets is probably a small tribute to the anti-porn campaigners. Sadly, there's no top shelf in Afghanistan. Hardcore DVDs are on sale in the front windows of shops in Jalalabad, the city where I was once held by the Taliban. Since Afghanistan has been liberated, you can now watch uncensored porn on your TV, buy child sex videos, or if you want some real action, you can go into brothels now operating blatantly in Kabul. And if you want to sniff, snort, or inject, Afghanistan is again at the top of the list as the world's #1 heroin producer. Yes, along with the liberation of Kabul, there is now sex, drugs, and I've no doubt they've got the rock and roll in there as well. The other soaring statistics include the kidnapping of young women, child rape, and suicide. But you just have to look around to see that women are being continually exploited and degraded right across the globe. But let's get back to this brothel in Islamabad. It had been operating for years, and the authorities conveniently turned a blind eye despite frequent protests. The Hafsa Madrasa sisters insist that they were prompted into taking such direct action after they were told about a young woman who was forcibly recruited to join the brothel. She says she was allegedly gang raped and the crime photographed so it could be used against her as blackmail in case she complained. It then transpired that other innocent girls had been recruited into this brothel in similar ways. Sadly, wherever it rears its unwelcome head, the Lal Masjid-like influence is all too visible over big cities today. It is surely quite easy to nip the disease in the bud in Islamabad, in the government's own backyard, if the government so decides. But once it takes root in a teeming city like Karachi, then its tentacles spread in every direction. The whole country risks being dragged back into the dark ages. I know very little about this writer, other than she seems reluctant to acknowledge that the wearing of the hijab or headscarf is an obligation for every practicing Muslim woman. I had to smile at her scathing comments about the niqab and the hijab, and of course she singled out Jack Straw for praise. She talks about women's rights, but not the rights of the women who are forced into brothels. What about them? Do they have no rights? She talks about how burqa-clad women are going into fashionable Islamabad neighborhoods, making uncovered women feel uncomfortable. She seems very highly disturbed by some of the minor hectoring, but seems quite unmoved by the gang rape of young girls pressed into prostitution. She has the nerve to mention how upscale sections of Islamabad are afraid these days of being attacked when they step out of the house in their normal attire. Oh, how awful it must be for the privileged few in Pakistan. I also smiled because it was in Pakistan that I finally began to wear the hijab full time. Not because some burqa-clad sister goaded me into wearing it, quite the reverse. For someone who just embraces Islam, like myself, it is sometimes quite difficult to put on the hijab, especially when you're living in the West. So I went off to stay with some friends outside of Islamabad to get used to the concept of wearing the hijab. And after a couple of weeks, I remember proudly wearing my hijab and going into Islamabad to visit a friend at his offices, and his secretary came to me and she said, "Why are you wearing that scarf? It's far too hot." I turned round and I said, "Sister, it's a lot hotter in hell." By the afternoon, she had on her hijab. But this writer in Dawn criticised the Lal Masjid and the Hafsa Madrasa sisters, and even said that it's difficult to take black-draped girls armed with sticks seriously as they go about attacking video shops. Nashaba has not only betrayed our Muslim sisters by writing this drivel, but she has also let down the side of women. I, for one, don't think prostitution is a joke. I regard brothels with despair and the rise of porn with revulsion. Her snooty outlook from her posh parlour tends to suggest that she regards as second-class citizens veiled or hijabi women who value modesty. Sadly, that same snooty attitude is prevalent in Britain today from those in the Muslim community who are seduced by advertising agencies who want to dilute Islam. They would do well to remember there is no rank in Islam, and the only path to paradise is through piety, not wealth, power, position, or beauty. Surely that is real liberation, being judged on your mind, not the length of your skirt. Someone who could see the link between violence and prostitution and porn very clearly was US feminist Andrea Dworkin. I have a feeling that if she was still alive today, she would salute those sisters in the Islamabad Madrasa who took direct action against the brothel keeper, regardless of their class or wealth and status. Islamically, I am very young, having reverted to Islam in 2003. One of the reasons I always loved to come to Birmingham is that it was actually one of the brothers from the Maktabar bookshop who performed my Shahada. Again, Abu Bakr was the brother. And something really wonderful just happened today when a new convert to Islam came. Sister Nisha has just converted to Islam in front of me and Brother Abu Bakr less than maybe an hour ago, and I welcome her into our fantastic family. As I say, Islamically, I'm very young, having reverted in 2003. And I know 9/11 had a huge impact on the world, but it wasn't really the start of something. It was the continuation of a legacy of US imperialism and a fear of Islam. Just over 10 years ago, young Muslims across the globe flooded into Bosnia to help their brothers and sisters fight for their very survival against the Serbs, who were carrying out a genocide sanctioned by the silence of the watching world. The impact was to try and stop the genocide. Western intervention, when it finally happened, was too little too late, and it only came after it was apparent that Muslims were beginning to win. Now, this isn't my conclusion. This is what Bill Clinton wrote in his biography, and he actually admitted that an Islamic State deep in the heart of Europe was simply too much to bear, and that is why there was Western intervention. This fear of Islam has now evolved in the last 10 years to such an extent that the blood of our brothers and sisters is flowing in torrents across Chechnya, Kashmir, Palestine, Afghanistan, Iraq, and we saw last year what happened in Lebanon. The war drums are beating in the direction now of Iran. I have walked through many of those killing fields, and I can tell you that the twisted, blown-up limbs of our Muslim brothers and sisters look exactly like those pulled from the rubble of the Twin Towers. Yet the message of today is quite clear. Muslim blood is a very cheap commodity. While there were services and silences held and are still held every year for the victims of 9/11, the London bombings, Bali, Madrid, and other similar atrocities, no one stands and marks or grieves for our dead. And you have to ask the question, why not? Then there are tens of thousands of innocent Muslims who continue to be tortured in faraway lands. And we have still Guantanamo Bay, a boil on the face of humanity. So what sort of message does this send out to Muslims in our communities? We're told that the radicalization of young people is down to extremists and extreme preachings from religious fanatics. And in some ways, these theories could be right, because when I thought about it the other week, I thought, yes, I have been radicalized by religious extremists. I've sat there and I've listened to them on the radio. I've switched on the television and listened to these religious fanatics with their messages of hate, and they have radicalized me. Every time I turn on the television and see Tony Blair and George Bush, those Christian fundamentalists, they radicalize me. They've radicalized an entire generation, not just of Muslim youth, an entire generation of people. Our children, our Muslim children, read about the heroic exploits of Saladin Ayyubi, Khalid bin Walid, Tariq bin Zayed, and listen intently to stories of courage and bravery about our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Do you know, more than 5 years ago, I had never even heard of the Prophet, peace be upon him. But now, today, I would give my last drop of blood to protect his name, his honor, and his memory. And people outside of Islam find this very difficult to understand. And Christian friends say to me, how can you be like that? We're not like that over Jesus. And I say, you know what, as Muslims, we probably care more about Jesus than you do. The day that you put the Virgin Mary into a snow globe and sold her for 50 pence was the day that you lost respect for your religion. And you just have to go to Rome and you see all the trinkets and the way that they have commercially exploited their faith and lost respect for their faith. Our modern day heroes include those two 60s martyrs, Malcolm X and Saeed Qutb. And I'm often criticized, but I'm going to do it again. This book has really influenced me and defined me as a Muslim. Milestones by Saeed Qutb. Tony Blair wants to try and ban it. The police have huge stocks of it now, following raids on the Maktaba, but there are still copies left. And as long as I have a breath in my body, I would say, buy this book. It's absolutely amazing. The reason why Tony Blair and others want to ban it is because they say Osama bin Laden has read it. Well, I looked into the background of Osama bin Laden. He's also read several different plays by Sheikh Zubair, which is Shakespeare to you and I. So should we ban Shakespeare as well? We have to stop this hysterical nonsense. Prime ministers, as we know, come and go. Islam will stay. The more they squeeze us, the stronger we will get, because that is the nature of Islam. This is the faith which is turning into the fastest growing religion across the world. And we all know why, and this is why our enemies fear us. In Britain, we have an invasion of what I call the happy clappies, and we have to beware of these people. And these are preachers who are trying to infect our communities with a diluted form of Islam. This is an Islam where they want to remove words like jihad, like khilafah, like Sharia law. They want to dilute our Islam. As I keep telling people, being a Muslim is so simple. You either believe in the 5 pillars of Islam or you don't. It's like being pregnant. You either are pregnant or you're not. Who ever heard of anybody being moderately pregnant? On that note, thank you very much for being so attentive. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have delivering it. Assalamu alaikum.